So in the run-up to this event, lots of people asked us, so what's the vision for the next 10 years? But if you were expecting a detailed plan about exactly what we're going to do in the next 10 years, you haven't understood how JPAL works. Our objective is simply to support and encourage the creativity of the researchers who are part of our network and the partners on the ground. As I've said repeatedly, it's the partnerships, it's the on-the-ground work, which is where the magic happens. So, but this leaves us with a slightly awkward ending to this session, because it's this belief in bottom-up means that it's hard for us to predict the future, because we're not in control of it. The long stream of NGOs and government organizations who come through my office and will know that I'm not in a position, I say this to many of them, I'm not in a position to tell really anybody what to do. I certainly don't tell a researcher what research to run. So we can't give you a detailed plan for what happens next, but we can maybe provide some ideas about the trends that we see emerging, what we think might be useful and important in the next 10 years. So to discuss that, I'd like to invite my fellow directors of JPAL to come on stage, Abhijit, Esther, and Ben.
Really?
Need help?
We specially asked for small stalls for Esther, but obviously not small enough. I'm going to abuse the prerogative of chair, I'm afraid, and start off and say a little bit about what I see in the emerging trends and challenges for the next 10 years in training capacity building. Right from the beginning, we knew that we were not in a position to run all the randomized trials that were needed to answer all the important questions on poverty around the world. So we knew that we had to train other people in how to do this work. And I think, but we've also understood that capacity building is something which covers the whole range of our work. It's not just about generating new PIs, new researchers. To do good research, you need well-trained enumerators, you need people who are good at data entry, you need partners who understand the importance of rigorous evidence, and you need press. If you're going to scale up the results and disseminate the results, you need press who can tell the difference between correlation and causation. And here I'm not just talking about the press in developing countries. So in the last 10 years, I think we, and also Innovations for Poverty Action, have made a lot of progress in building capacity in all of these different areas, in building really good field operations for running high-quality research on the ground. But I think we have two challenges going forward. One of them is that while we see capacity building in this very broad sense, it's not necessarily, we haven't been so good at communicating that to other people. And still too often, capacity building is seen by other organizations and donors. It's measured simply by, do you have a PI, a co-author on the study who comes from a developing country? And by the way, all of our many affiliates who work in US institutions but come from developing countries don't count. They have to be from a developing country institution. And while that's an important aim, and we care a lot about having good researchers in developing country institutions, just focusing on that one thing misses all the other aspects of capacity building that we need. And I think part of it is a measurement issue, because it's easy to count the number of co-authors. it's not so easy to measure the kind of capacity we passionately believe is important across the whole range of what you do. And I hope if you've learned anything from today, you've learned that, what the professor does is really just, a tiny part of all of this work. But measuring is something that we are meant to be good at. So I think we will come up with better ways of measuring this progress in this complicated issue. The second and more substantive area is I think we've been very good at building research capacity on the ground. And many of the people, and you've heard about from Sean, people who worked on the ground and then went off and did masters and PhDs to learn the more technical aspects of this work and come back as researchers. But that progress isn't always open to everyone. And I feel there's a break in the ladder, the capacity building ladder, for people who cannot take 2 years or 6 years off from the field. They've learned a lot in the field, but they can't leave their families for that length of time to go and do a master's or a PhD. So one of the things I see as a challenge for us going forward is to develop training tools that are so much more flexible so that people who are working in the field and have proved themselves as great field researchers can learn the much more technical aspects of the work and go on to do analysis and write papers without having to go and leave their country and come to the US or Europe to do a master's or a PhD. And this is where MIT's idea of edX and massive open online courses comes in. We've got to create much more flexible tools and turn them into formal education certificates so that these people who've learned so much can then demonstrate how much they've learned, so that we no longer have this break in the capacity building ladder. And we've already seen 1473, MIT's premier development economics course, go online, and over 4,000 people from around the world completed that course taught by Esther and Abhijit last year. But I think we can do a lot more to deliver engaging, targeted, easily digestible, and interactive training materials that are needed to ensure that everybody can contribute and learn how to do this work in the time that they have, in the situation where they are. I'd now like to turn to Abhijit for your views on emerging issues and challenges.
So I'm going to basically, I think what you said in introducing this session, I will strongly endorse. So the first order answer to, I think, what the emerging trends are is that I don't know, and I'm happy that I don't know. Because I think we have an amazingly creative group of nearly 100 people. They're going to come up with stuff that I have never dreamt of. If you look at just what happened to our cities 15 years ago were sort of primarily we made the case that this will give us unbiased estimates. I think now if you look at where they're used, the aspect of our cities that gets leveraged, the fact that they give unbiased answers remains, of course, a convenient fact. But I think what gets leveraged all the time is the fact that an RCT delivers the treatment you want. And that allows you to generate variation that the world doesn't deliver. Things that you think could not be. So, Dean, who must be somewhere or probably isn't somewhere, he's already organizing 3 other RCTs outside. Dean came up with the idea of, promising people one price and then giving them a lower price. And that just created a tool for doing research on a number of topics, has been used in many different ways. And there's going to be many more tools like that. I think that's just the brilliance of this group. And I anticipate nothing better than being surprised right and left. The second, having said that, when you're asked to have an opinion, I guess it's hard to resist having one. So let me give in to that temptation for a couple of minutes. So one thing I do expect is the much more extensive use of big data, of administrative data, of data that's collected for reasons that have nothing to do with our exercises, which are available, like For example, data from cell phone calls, data from transfers on M-Pesa. These kinds of data, I assume, will become more easily available, and they will allow us to then test very fine hypotheses. With the power of having that much data is that you can test, even small effects can be tested. So that's I think something that's going to happen, is already happening, and will somewhat clearly change the field. Second thing that I think will continue is, I think, innovative measurement. We will be getting, people are measuring cortisol levels to see if people are stressed out by being poor. There are going to be many, many other such ideas. People are going to start find, I think, more reliable measures using tools from neuroscience, using tools from psychology, using tools for philosophy, bringing tools in, expanding the set of outcomes that we can measure. I think I think unfairly get a pushback when people say that you're measuring only the economic outcomes. In fact, a lot of, for example, Esther's work, there's an attempt to measure things that are, for example, attitude on gender. And I think there's a whole range of things like that which can be measured better and will become, I think, the tools will become refined and will have much more reliable insights into those things. More conventionally, like in, for example, Ben's work, there will be much more exciting just strategies to like when he went and measured the quality of the roads in Indonesia to figure out how much, road building material was being stolen. That kind of thing, I think people will come up with ideas we haven't thought of, but the things that we think can't be measured, like corruption, will be measured in many different ways. And I'm very excited to see what happens. Finally, I think we're going to move in the direction where we have moved already, which is having enormously, we went from, first our city I did, there were 20 schools treatment, 20 control. Now we're talking, Ben was talking about experiment, there were 600 villages. There are experiments where there are entire, Karthik was talking about an experiment which seemed to cover the entire state of AP, which is, I guess, the size of France. So, I think that's going to happen, and that's going to deal with some of the concerns about external validity, which I think are in the air, I think are legitimate. I think a lot of these experiments, just because of the scale at which they operate, will address that. And I did want to make one more point, despite the, I have the Indian habit of saying finally a few times. So end to end, I think we're going to get more and more into building theories out of these experiments. I think there's a few areas where we have been able to take the results of the experiments, feed them back into a narrative. Rukmini described a bit the work that we've done on education with Pratham and how that's kind of built into a narrative. But I think we're going to get better and better at it. As the experiments accumulate, we'll see the anomalies, we'll see the places where the facts just don't fit some existing story, and we're going to build better stories. We'll do new experiments to test those stories, and I think we'll come to a point where we have much better sense of what is a portable insight from all these experiments. I think all of those at least will happen, but much more, I hope. Thanks.
So one thing, as Abhijit said, and as Rachel said, we can't necessarily predict exactly where things are going, but one trend that I certainly see in the air, and I think that echoed throughout a lot of the presentations that you heard today, was an increasing engagement with governments. And both in terms of doing research in cooperation with governments and working with governments for scale-up of programs. And in part, I think that comes naturally from JPAL's and our affiliates' desire to achieve policy impact. At some level, if you say policy impact, a lot of policy, not all, of course, but a lot of policies happen with the government. Governments have an amazing ability, because of their reach, to scale up kind of, very rapidly. And they also have a tremendous amount of resources that can be brought to bear on a problem. And so I think that we're starting to see an increasing engagement with governments. Now, when we say policy scale-ups with governments, I don't think we just mean kind of turnkey solutions where we say, aha, we've evaluated this, please go Xerox this 100 million times. I don't think it quite, sometimes it works that way, which is great. But I think if you listen to a lot of the conversations, it has to be a little bit more of a give and take and a little bit more listening to kind of what the needs are that the government wants. And I think that my own experience, as well as that of many of our colleagues, has been, for example, not just what I was talking about, what you heard in Michael Greenstone's presentation, you heard it in the panel discussion we had right after lunch, was about thinking about what are the questions that are of policy interest and looking for that exciting area of overlap where you can design trials that both answer kind of really relevant policy questions and also of broader academic interest. And that's kind of where I think a great match can happen, and where we can really be successful at answering questions that governments can then turn into policies. Now, we're not naive about the challenges that entails, right? I mean, you heard lots of examples about what those challenges are. You have to be quick, it's nothing, 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 and you need the answer yesterday. So I think we recognize that. But I think there's an increasing sophistication and ability among our affiliates and throughout our JPAL network to support exactly those kind of policy engagements, both getting researchers and policymakers talking to each other so that when there are those policy questions, we can do those kind of quick research engagements, and then can sort of support the engagement process, as someone's saying, have the person who's embedded with the government so that we know when a senator has attention, we can be there to sort of help convey the evidence that we have. And I think that that kind of ability can help overcome some of the real challenges that working with governments entail. So, I see this engagement with governments as as one possible trend. Now, of course, that's not to say that we're not going to continue all the incredibly exciting work we have with our many other partners, with our NGO partners, with corporations, with other organizations. I think that's going to be, and in fact, the ability of those organizations to be less bureaucratic allows a lot of the really innovative work that I think that Abhijit was discussing. And I think that that will certainly continue as we see moving forward. But I think that if you look at how our portfolio will change, maybe 10 years from now, I think there'll be an increasing role for the government sector.
So if we pull together all the strands from what has been said, and to some extent from the day, one way to summarize this is the key challenge is the following. In the space of 10 years, we've multiplied our number of affiliates roughly by 10. If we manage to do that again in the next 10 years, which would be a lot, we would end up a little short of 1,000 affiliates. That's not a very small number, but that is a very small number, in fact, compared to the extent of the work that there is to be done. So it is not going to happen with us. It's not going to happen with just us. It's going to happen if the culture of learning that we inhabit and live and breathe makes its way in a much broader kind of a way. And I think the definition of success in the next 10 years is going to be that. It's going to be that it remains learning, and it remains learning in its creativity and unknown path and whatever, but that it goes much beyond us. What does that mean? It means partnerships. Many of these partners are here today, and many were mentioned from IPA, Evidence Action, SIGA, of course, all of the NGOs that spoke today, our government partner, Pratham, SNS, Banden, Techo, and I'm only naming the one that some of the ones that are here today, which is unfair to the others. So partnerships are a key role, and many other partnerships. We never see ourselves as competition to any other center, because we are not really a center, we are a network, if we are successful, it's because there will be many, 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 many other centers that are creating to do something somewhat related, and that we can help at some extent in this effort. The other, as Rachel mentioned, is capacity building, and the innovation in the form that the capacity building takes, such that at a level or another, the idea that you can learn from what you're doing, you can, fail often, fail quickly, and find out something from that, makes its way outside of NGOs and Silicon Valley into the regular standard operating procedures of governments and of large organizations, and of really everyone. And the last being policy, and we need to find and have, I think, gotten today a lot of very good insights about how in the margin, never in the center, because it's not that we don't believe in democracy and other things like that, but at the margin, somewhere in the space, a culture of learning gets to live its life inside government organization and illuminate the rest of what's being done. With all the constraint that the rhythm of political life exists and is not going to go away, and the rhythm of research is different, but that doesn't mean they cannot talk to each other at in some time frame or the other. The exact shape it's going to take, we don't know. That we are going to succeed, we certainly hope. What we do know is we are, and this is more looking at today maybe, on our 10-year anniversary, we are amazingly fortunate to have the best possible organization we could wish for. And I'm going to bring it a little bit inward just for a second. All of our affiliates have been mentioned. Our staff is just the best possible, from the research assistant, you've seen there are many talents, to Rachel. And we are evidence-type people, but we also believe in descriptive evidence. So I don't have a trial, but you had one day of descriptive evidence in front of you. I think this was a fantastic day. This was the best gift we could get. And so I want to acknowledge the effort that has gone into that, led by Iqbal. So if Iqbal would agree to stand again and go back from his retirement as MC, we could acknowledge him and clap for him. But he's disappeared. But of course, it's not just Iqbal. It's actually been, I'm a little bit sorry to say, close to the entire Cambridge office that's been working on this. And like the randomized evolution don't really stop. So it's not that we put the poor of people of the world on hold while this was happening. So this was mainly their day job for several weeks, stretching to several months. So if we can give a hand to the Cambridge office people to give a hand. And finally, just to get a sense, if anybody who works in a project led by a JPAL person, no matter whether they're in JPAL or IPA or SIGA or EPOD or whatever acronym you wish, if you would stand up for a second, and we can also say happy birthday to all of you. That's more than that.